Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. So I've been finding information out about George VI and Elizabeth from the book by Sally Bendel Smith called George VI and Elizabeth. And it's been great learning about the parents of Queen Elizabeth II. They were certainly great role models. So today we're going to see how King George VI and Elizabeth attended the wedding of their daughter, Elizabeth, and Philip, her fiancé. It'll make us feel like we're guests at that wedding and part of the royal family, and we can learn about what happened before the wedding and afterwards. So Princess Elizabeth and Philip got married November the 20th, 1947. 3 days before the wedding, there was a celebration at the palace. There was a dinner dance for friends, family, and visiting royalty. Philip started the dancing with a hokey-cokey, and a little bit was in front of the conga line, out of the music room, through the picture gallery and blue drawing room. I would have liked to have seen that. So when Queen Elizabeth saw the line going by, she told Bertie, "I mustn't miss this, Bertie." And she grabbed the king's tailcoat, and they joined the line. And the party wound down at 4 a.m., and the king and the queen did a slow waltz as their last dance. After that, everybody stood at attention for God Save the King, and then after that, the royal family said goodnight. Or was it good morning? The next night, the king and queen held a grand ball at Buckingham Palace for more than 1,000 guests. The king once again was dressed in white tail and ties. The queen wore one of her crinoline gowns of white satin. It was embroidered in gold, and she wore a diamond tiara and necklace. Princess Elizabeth wore a gown of tulle embellished with gold palettes, and she wore a necklace given to her by Field Marshal Smuts. It had 21 diamonds to celebrate her 21st birthday. And a funny thing happened at the party. Smuts was feeling good, and then when he saw Queen Mary, 80 years old, walk toward him and the group he was talking to, he said, "Ah, here is the Queen of Queens. The rest are little potatoes." And then Queen Elizabeth found out about it, and the next year when Smuts came to lunch at the palace, the queen said to the butler, "No potatoes for Field Marshal Smuts. He doesn't like them." So that was funny. The guests, Duff and Diana Cooper, arrived an hour late at 10:30, and they found all the guests drinking champagne and standing around the buffet table. There was caviar and chocolate gâteau. I hope I said that right. The Coopers said the royals arrived in a herd, and then Duff said the queen had grown very large but looked queenly and very well dressed. Princess Elizabeth, she said, was everything that a princess in a fairy tale ought to look like on the eve of her wedding. So everybody must have enjoyed dancing because it lasted till after midnight. And the king even led the conga line, going through the staterooms and corridors. The wedding day, the king and queen had 2 regiments of the household cavalry escorting the bridal procession, and they wore their full dress uniforms. One regiment was dressed in blue tunics and the other in scarlet, and they both had plumed helmets and breastplates shining. And this was the first time for the ceremonial dress since 1939. Princess Elizabeth had on a wedding gown that was created by Hartnell. It was ivy, silk satin, encrusted with pearls and crystals, and she wore a diamond tiara that she borrowed from Queen Mary. Philip pinned the insignia of the Order of the Garter that King George VI had given him the day before. Lilibet had gotten her garter the week before that. So Bertie wrote to Queen Mary that, "I know Philip understands his new responsibilities in his marriage to Lilibet." The king wore his Admiral of the Fleet uniform, and he rode to Westminster Abbey with his daughter in the Irish state coach. Ahead of them was the glass coach with the Queen Elizabeth inside, and she wore an apricot silk brocade with a matching upturned hat, and Princess Margaret was with her. And according to the book, George VI and Elizabeth, the weather was cold and cloudy with a little bit of sunshine. There was a great crowd of well-wishers. They filled the parks and lined the streets 50 deep in some places. The ceremony lasted an hour. It began at 11:30 a.m. The ceremony was about the same as the day George VI and Elizabeth's wedding day. The only difference was that 200 million listeners were able to hear Elizabeth and Philip say, "I do," over the radio. After that, they all returned to the palace and stepped onto the crimson and gold draped balcony. The king, queen, Queen Mary, and Princess Margaret joined them and then withdrew. The bride and groom got to enjoy the cheers from the crowd. The Times wrote that underlying the entire day's pageantry was the recognition that the princess and Philip were the leaders to whom the coming generation will look for inspiration. The wedding breakfast was for 150 in the white and gold supper room. There were 3 courses, which was smaller than the Duke and Duchess of Kent's 10-course feast when they got married in 1934. Philip and Lilibet sat with the king and the queen, Queen Mary, and Princess Alice of Battenberg at the center table. Other guests were seated at smaller round tables. The main centerpiece was white flowers, and they contained heather along with myrtle from a bush that had grown from a sprig of Queen Victoria's wedding bouquet. So that's pretty fancy. The king gave a small toast saying, "To the bride," and he raised his glass of champagne. And they had bagpipers from Balmoral playing. The couple, they cut the 4-tiered wedding cake with a sword, and the sword belonged to Philip's maternal grandfather. By mid-afternoon, the family reappeared in the balcony. Then a little while later, a landau pulled into the quadrangle to take Philip and Lilibet to Waterloo Station for their honeymoon getaways. They would first go to Mountbatten Estate of Broadlands, then for a longer stay at Burke Hall. As they went towards the carriage, they were showered with rose petals from family and friends. The king held the hand of the queen, and together they ran, as everyone else did, to the palace railings. Lilibet wrote her mother, "My mouth, my eyes, everything was jammed with rose petals. I felt as if I might cry if there was any more delay." And when the king and the queen returned to the palace, there was a crowd outside roaring for them. They went to the balcony 4 times, one time with Margaret. The crowds grew larger and more insistent, and then they made their last appearance at 11 p.m. It was an emotional day for the king and queen, and Bertie told the Archbishop of Canterbury that he had been on the verge of tears when they signed the registry after the service. He said it was a far more moving thing to give away your daughter than to be married yourself. George VI wrote to Lilibet he felt pride walking her through the abbey, and he said, "When I handed your hand to the Archbishop, I felt that I had lost something very precious. I can, I know, always count on you, and now Philip, to help us in our work." Still, he said, her leaving had created a great blank in the lives of her parents. The Queen wrote to Elizabeth, "Papa and I are happy in your happiness, for it has always been our dearest wish that your marriage should be one of the heart as well as the head." She hoped that Lilibet and Philip should love each other through good days and bad or depressing days. She wrote to Philip expressing her joy that he would cherish and look after Lilibet because, however independent-minded women are nowadays, they still need a man to lean on. Elizabeth tried to reassure Philip about his role in the royal family by saying she understood he might feel burdened by the demands of the public life, but advised that he could find balance in the knowledge that you would be giving so much towards the happiness and stability of the country. She felt that Philip could have individual leadership as well as a married couple leadership. She wrote, "As a family, we do try to work as a team, but each going their own way." She felt confident that Philip could make a very valuable contributions towards the common pool. She was also certain that he could help Papa very much. Philip took his role seriously, and so did George VI. Bertie arranged for Winston Churchill to give Philip a private tutorial in the Constitution over lunch, and the secretary thought that Philip was the best prince consort that had ever been anywhere. The marriage of Queen Elizabeth and Philip brought the king and queen joy, but they were upset too. Elizabeth, Margaret, Bertie, and Elizabeth had always been a close-knit family, so having Princess Elizabeth leave the nest was hard for them. They were happy for Elizabeth because they knew how much she loved Philip, and the couple made a great pair, as we all know, and stayed married throughout their lives, which was a great achievement. I hope that everybody enjoyed the video, and if you did, if you could give it a thumbs up, it would be greatly appreciated. I wish everybody a good day, and tune in again soon for another episode of Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. Thank you. Bye.